On Christmas Eve 2025, I was introduced to the Ultimate Universe. I had started playing Marvel Rivals just a few weeks prior, which had reinvigorated my interest in the Marvel Universe after years of MCU burnout. What can I say? Endgame was a very satisfying conclusion to me. I didn't really feel like I needed to know what happened next. But Rivals was a new way to immerse yourself in the world of Marvel like never before, allowing you to feel like a disgusting animal like Wolverine, or experience how awful it is to be a woman in public. In becoming more active in the Rivals community, I started learning more about Marvel's current status quo in the comics, and I stumbled upon a post about the new Ultimate Universe. Wait, they made a Spider-Man story that's not just the same as every movie and TV show from the last 20 years? He doesn't get his powers until he's already married and has kids? Fucking sign me up! So I binge read all of Ultimate Spider-Man up to the latest issue at the time, number 12, legally, of course, and I was hooked. I binged every other Ultimate issue out at that point and fell in love with the Ultimate X-Men, the Ultimates, and was fine with Black Panther. I'll be honest, I still haven't caught up to Black Panther. I'll binge it when it finishes. When I got back home after visiting my family, I looked up the closest comic book store and set up a pull box, and I haven't stopped visiting since. This is the story of my first year as a comic book reader and collector. Let's start with a bit of prehistory. Despite being heavily tuned to Marvel Comics through new media in the 2000s, I didn't read the comics as a kid. My hometown didn't have a comic store, or at least I couldn't find it, and I learned everything I knew either from the shows and movies or YouTube lore videos. I did get a few graphic novels through my teen years though, particularly Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and The Killing Joke, all books I had no business reading at 14. The first single issues I owned were gifted to me Christmas by my grandma. The first 3 issues of 1992's Infinity War, since I had probably asked for the comics the movie was based on, and my grandma didn't know any better, but neither did I. Infinity War would be the first miniseries I sought out and completed as a collector, and it wasn't a bad read. I picked up Infinity Gauntlet later in trade, and I might have honestly preferred War over Gauntlet. Aside from keeping up with the Ultimate Universe, I branched out into two main paths in the first part of the year, the Absolute Universe and the X-Men. Having fallen in love with X-Men 97, I caught up to the current X-Men runs at the time, particularly Jed MacKay's X-Men and Gail Simone's Uncanny X-Men. X-Men started the year strong with issue number 10, a Cold War-style argument between Cyclops and Federal Agent Lundquist about their shared responsibility to prevent mutant and human tragedies, and the difference in likenesses and their methods and ethics. Following this up is a brief visit from Scott's space pirate daddy, bringing trouble to Alaska, which leads to the arrival of reinforcements from Canada's premier superhero team, Alpha Flight, because this book is written by a Canadian. But soon after this, I would experience, for the first time in my life, an event. X-Manhunt. X-Manhunt was, I'd say, disappointing, but I don't really think it could have been satisfying. Following the 4-part Raid on Grey Malkin crossover between X-Men and Uncanny X-Men back in December, X-Manhunt sees a recently broken out of prison Charles Xavier seeking help finding the last Krakoan egg, which he can use to revive the mother of his child, and flee to Shi'ar space to help their daughter, caught in the midst of an intergalactic coup. That was a lot to drop in one sentence if you don't know anything about the X-Men, but the point is, this event really only happened to get Xavier out in space for Imperial, another event which hardly used him at all. So it was never going to do anything that interesting. This is just a long, drawn-out escort mission for Marvel. Because of this, the X-Manhunt tie-in issues range from decent conversations between Xavier and his former students about his role in a changing world, to barely having anything to do with the Manhunt at all, with very little tonal or thematic cohesion between the 7 different series this event involved. Not a great first impression of comic events, but as we'll get to in a bit, this year had no shortage of chances to change my mind. March saw the start of the second wave of Absolute titles from DC. Much like the Ultimate Universe, DC's Absolute Universe reimagines classic heroes like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman in a world much darker than we're used to, with the odds stacked against him from their very creation. This world, created from Darkseid's very essence, sees a Superman raised into his teens on a dying Krypton, Diana sent to die in hell as a punishment for the Amazons defying Zeus, and Batman, still having his mom? And he's also not a billionaire, but reading this book, you really don't feel like that matters much. He still has a Batmobile. His Batmobile is even bigger in this world. How is this a setback? All 3 of these books do a great job at differentiating themselves from their main universe counterparts, though. Even Batman. He may have way too much gear for the not being rich part to really matter, but this version really hones in on the loner aspect of Bruce Wayne, to the point you really feel concerned for him more than billionaire Batman, who at least has like a loving family at this point. Absolute Superman harkens back to the days of the character where his main thing was beating up landlords. This Superman is all about true justice for the oppressed, fighting against the Lazarus megacorporation that takes advantage of the poor and marginalized in every part of the world, as he tries to make sense of his place on Earth after losing his family, his people, and his planet. Having not been raised as a human by the Kents, this Kal-El is a much more brash and uninhibited force. However, I think the greatest contrast comes from Absolute Wonder Woman, Despite being raised in hell as a sorceress by the witch Circe, Diana is just as compassionate, resourceful, and brave as ever, and that unwavering heart is highlighted against the backdrop of a world she was never meant to save, but will die trying to anyway. The next 3 Absolute series to debut were Flash, Martian Manhunter, and Green Lantern, with an Absolute Evil one-shot releasing later in the year. I picked up the premiere issue for all 3 of these books, but only kept up with one, which we'll be talking about much more later. At this point, it's nearing summer, and I've started to learn about a critical aspect of the comic reader's journey: events. Events are essentially large blocks of comic issue releases that all fall under one general story umbrella. Notable examples from history include Marvel's Civil War, Civil War II, and Infinity War, while DC boasts classic events like Crisis on Infinite Earths, Identity Crisis, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, and Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. When an event happens, several titles from a publisher, usually in a certain smaller sphere of that world, such as Space, or Street Level, or X-Men, will publish tie-in issues that are meant to give us an insight into how the overarching conflict of the event as a whole affects our favorite characters in our favorite book. Sometimes this can be great. You learn more about the world and the role your favorites play in it, how they affect the greater conflict and how the greater conflict affects them, and maybe the event plays into the concurrent story of that book in a way that feels natural. But sometimes a storyline will get completely sidelined or just cut off entirely to make room for an event tie-in story. Marvel had 3 big status quo affecting events in 2025, with DC really just having 1. 2 if you count We Are Yesterday, but I didn't read that. Marvel started the year with One World Under Doom. Or rather, Marvel's whole year was One World Under Doom. With a total of 81 issues with tie-ins from 8 then ongoing series, One World Under Doom started in late January, and its core series ended in November, with its final epilogue issues releasing in February 2026. The event follows several corners of the Marvel Universe as the Fantastic Four and the Avengers attempt to break Doom's control of the world, after he gained the powers of the Sorcerer Supreme in 2024's Blood Hunt. I liked One World Under Doom enough, but didn't read any of the tie-in books except for Runaways, mostly just because I wasn't reading any of the ongoing series and didn't care that much about the Doomified minis. But while the heroes of the world are trying to gain their freedom, Imperial asks the question, what is everyone else doing? The answer is Murder Mystery Coup, of course. Running counter to One World Under Doom, Imperial consists of a 4-issue core miniseries and 5 tie-in one-shots, acting as setup for a new era of cosmic storytelling. By the end of Imperial, fragile alliances have shattered, Star-Lord is in charge of the galaxy now, and the Inhumans are relevant again? To put simply how I viewed Imperial in comparison to One World Under Doom, Imperial is what you want when you ask your mom if you can stop for food on a drive, and One World Under Doom is food at home. Sure, there's a lot more of it, and it's probably all much cheaper than what you want to stop for, but damn if just one cheesy gordita crunch isn't way more satisfying sometimes. Also, remember how I said X-Manhunt only served to get Professor X in space, and then they didn't do anything with him anyway? He doesn't show up once. Not even at the very end, when they're just setting up all the spin-offs. He appears in one tie-in issue, Exiles, and he doesn't do anything in it but stand around, which I guess should be impressive for a guy who is most famously known as a wheelchair user, but no, I guess he's been standing for years now. So I don't get why each X book needed one issue to explain him going out to space when he could have just shown up in Exiles and explained how he got there in that issue. Now, we already talked about X-Manhunt and how that affected the X-Men books, but that was just the mutants' first big event of the year. While the world is dealing with Doom and the galaxy is dealing with Empire, the mutants are dealing with Revelation. Imagine for a second, you're a new X-Men fan. Maybe you watched the movies or X-Men 97 and you loved it, so you wanted to start reading X-Men comics. What's this? From the Ashes? A new beginning for the mutants and almost every character you know is in one of these books? Awesome, I'm in. Let's use McKay's X-Men for our example. So you're reading X-Men and you're really invested in this story and the X-Men's lives in Alaska. Then a few months in, fuck Alaska! Beast is in prison, and we're gonna fight the other X-Men from Louisiana because fuck Charles Xavier! And then next issue, we're back to the Alaska storyline, and it's like the whole prison thing never happened. Okay, so you're vibing with Alaska again, and Scott's space pirate dad, and fuck Alaska! We need to stop Charles Xavier from doing whatever the fuck he wants to do, even though he wants to leave Earth and all of us alone anyway. And then he's gone, and we're back to Alaska like it didn't matter at all. It didn't. So you're back to chilling in Alaska and fighting fake X-Men and incorporeal mutant kids, and fuck Alaska! Do you remember Krakoa? What? No, I started with this series. Remember Doug Ramsey? He was Apocalypse's heir, and he's back and he's taking over the world, so we're gonna have Cyclops get pulled into the future by the future X-Men so he can go back in time later to stop that future from happening. This has been my biggest issue with Marvel events all year. They're so intrusive. When a book only has one issue coming out each month, having 2 or more of those in a row completely cut off a story you were more invested in is such a flat line. I did not read hardly any of Age of Revelation because I didn't care. I cared about Cyclops and Magneto trying to re-examine what the X-Men mean to the world. I cared about Rogue and Gambit trying to reaffirm what the X-Men mean to each other. And I cared about Kitty and Emma relearning what the X-Men mean to young mutants in a world that hates and fears them. Maybe I'll read Age of Revelation after I delve into the Krakoan era, and I'll likely be keeping up with McKay's X-Men and Simone's Uncanny X-Men for the next era, but I can only read so many books in a day, and there are many things ahead of Age of Revelation on the list. I'm not talking about giant-sized X-Men. You can't make me.